Good evening. Welcome to another Newsmaker Live broadcast right here on DBS Television with me, Timothy Polion. We go up until 10 o'clock this evening, at which time we'll be concluding with the clip that peaked, getting all set to observe and celebrate, if you care to, Emancipation Day come tomorrow. Several decades ago, it certainly was a very significant observance that would have been spearheaded by the African community in St. Lucia. There's participation as well, to a certain extent, by the trade union movement. But of late, I think that it has gone without anyone at the helm in terms of organizing various activities or even lectures. But nonetheless, Emancipation Days should be an observance that we should give its due attention, and hoping going forward that we'll be doing a lot more to ensure that it gets the kind of respect that it deserves. Because truly, we are emancipated. Yes, to a lesser extent, we are still enslaved in one way or the other, but it is worth celebrating. Emancipation Day was first established, by the way, after the British Parliament passed the Slave Emancipation Act in 1833, and that is banning its policy of enslaving and transporting Africans across the Atlantic Ocean to the Caribbean islands. Trinidad and Tobago later became the first country in the world to declare a public holiday to celebrate the abolition of slavery, replacing Columbus Discovery Day, which commemorated Columbus's landing at Moruga on 31st July 1498. And I have as my guest, so that we could discuss this whole Emancipation Day observance in detail, he is a history teacher. His name is Nkrumah Lucien. Welcome to the program, sir.
All right, thanks. Well, good night.
What should Emancipation Day mean to us as a people?
Well, Emancipation Day would mean various things for various peoples. But I want to make reference to a quote I came across online by Dr. Taimba Salandi. And he was making the point that whereas Emancipation Day looks at the ending of enslavement of Africans, it should go beyond that, in the sense of the fact that whereas you had enslavement, you also have from that system the sidelining, the suppression of wider perspectives, indigenous peoples, etc. And this has persisted even today. But of course, emancipation looks at that period of enslavement and the impacts of that we continue to experience today.
But I'm sure it's very shocking, particularly, let's say, to young people and people who have not sufficiently educated themselves about the slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade, and so on. And I came across some statistics. It was shocking that the number of slaves captured and transported would have been about 12.5 million. Mortality rate would have been about 14%. That, to me, is shocking, is unacceptable. Why do you believe even then, at that era, it was something that was tolerated in the first place? I know there was economic gains to be had from it. But why do you think it was tolerated apart from that?
Economics played a big part in it, but there's also the justifications given. And of course, okay, people were being enslaved because people were making money out of it. And to support that system, you had a bunch of different justifications being given. And that's where you get the idea of Africans being enslaved, Africans being uncivilized, Africans being heathens, and this kind of explanations as to why, even though they're being enslaved, that it's actually in their favor. But I would say the main factor that held it up would have been the economic aspect of it, that Britain was gaining significantly from it. We know from slavery and colonialism, which continued after, that this established Britain and other European countries in a dominant economic position and enriched many of them throughout the period that it existed.
But we continuously hear about the usual nations that benefited from the slave trade. But I'm hearing through the work of the CRC, that's the CARICOM Reparations Commission, that they have discovered that there are a number of other countries that we're hearing for the first time that benefited from the slave trade. And those countries would include the likes of Switzerland, also Russia, Sweden as well.
Yeah. Yeah, the economic structure of the world today, I mean, in terms of trade, in terms of who controls resources, stemmed from that period. So it's not surprising that even if they were not directly involved, even you could look at some of the Scandinavian countries, while they did not, many of them did not engage so significantly in the transporting of slaves, when it came to supplying some of the foods that were being given to the enslaved Africans here, the credit that planters used to set themselves up, they participated. And I mean, as the international trade system developed, it benefited from this. So,
how did this whole injustice commence? How did it start?
How did the enslavement? Well, it has a long history, because prior to the British being involved, although the British ended up being one of the biggest suppliers of slaves, the biggest participants, it began really after the Arab slave trade. You had the Portuguese, who were the main ones who were trading along the coast, and then gradually more of them began to get involved.
But I'm just curious about its commencement. There must be something that really triggered it.
Well, they had to get the authorization.
Somebody start one day and say, "Oh, we have this brilliant idea, so that we could get people cheap labor to be on our plantation and so on." But how did they coerce, particularly the West Africans? You know,
there was coercion. There was also the fact that, remember, you had various nations involved. You had initially, when the interaction began between the Portuguese and the kingdoms like Congo, they would have, for instance, they would have given persons who may have been an issue in the society, may have been given over. And then gradually the trade began, where there was an increased demand for. Okay, and then of course that created not divisions but wars among the various nations, because nations would find themselves in a situation where guns are being traded. So what would have been a conflict between two nations, now whoever has the guns becomes the more powerful, so they can then invade this other nation, capture persons who they can sell. For you not to be a victim, you yourself may have to get the weapons that will allow you to defend yourself, and this thing spiraled and led to more and more of it happening.
But this happened to the black population primarily, right? Because they lacked sophistication, they were not educated.
No, well,
they were vulnerable.
I gave a little explanation of it, that a conflict which may have existed would have been exacerbated by the intrusion of that market for slaves. So whereas persons would, as in anywhere else, persons would get into conflict over resources or little squabbles, that happened everywhere. But now when you had a constant demand for, you now had wars that were being fought to gather persons. Yeah, so.
Do you think that obviously the blacks were complicit in that? Why do you, and that's why people tell you they don't trust black people, they're not worthy of the brotherhood and so on, because they like to turn on each other. That's what transpires.
Well, of course, that is a myth that is created. Following through from this period, the myth is created that it's something inherent, that blacks don't support each other, etc. Of course, that is bogus. But
it could not have happened if they didn't get the cooperation of other blacks.
Again, I want to put it in. We need to put it in context. You have, whether you look at Africa, you look at Europe, you had various nations. You didn't have a group of people who all identified in the same way. There were conflicts between them before. They had their separate identities, and this was something that exacerbated during that period of time. There's no area of the world where you just have persons who are, all identify as the same and have no issues. But of course, if you have a situation where there is a situation of prosperity, where there's a common, as presently happens in let's say in Europe, where there's a large collective benefit from a situation, you may tend to have less of those conflicts arising. But then when this may fall apart, you may have this situation arising.
Over 400 years later, how has this impacted the black race?
Okay. I would like to answer that part of it, but I also want to point out that this period of slavery impacts, you could say, almost every part of the world. It does impact, the most immediate impacts on persons of African descent would be things like the economic situation. If we speak about the Caribbean, remember when you speak of emancipation, the act which emancipated the enslaved Africans established a few things. There was compensation for the planters. The enslaved Africans were it was no longer legal to enslave them, and then they had to make their way within that system.
We had an apprenticeship system period.
The apprenticeship period simply meant that they were still bound to the plantation, but if they worked beyond a certain period of time, they were supposed to be paid for it. The planters, of course, would make whatever attempt to ensure that they got the work that they needed done during the period when the Africans were to work for free. Also, you had, coming out of apprenticeship, the Africans now had to support themselves in terms of their needs, their clothing, their housing, renting sometimes from the same plantations. Yeah, so...
But in a nutshell, why do you believe that after those countries have benefited to the tune of billions of dollars from the hard work of those slaves who were not properly compensated, even after they were freed, why do you think that there is this reluctance? And even former Prime Minister David Cameron, when he visited Jamaica in 2015, yes, he was sorry because of the impact that the slave trade had on the rest of the world, the Caribbean in particular, and so on. But he was not willing to commit to reparation. Why not repay for the enslavement of our forefathers?
That would be a good question for him to answer. But it's a matter of taking responsibility, and it would make a very strong statement, a good statement, I think, but a very strong statement for any of the European countries to accept the responsibility for their part in the enslavement. Because as I pointed out before, the economic system which currently exists and which they largely benefit from stem from this period. So to accept that, and that was something that was put forward by Dr. Eric Williams in his book, Caribbean Capitalism and Slavery. If they were to accept that, okay, the present economic and political dominance of Europe exists in part as a result of this, then it brings to the fore a lot of other questions, right? And it may even mean that some of our leaders may have to ask some more serious questions about our development and the cause that we are charting as well.
What kind of questions?
Okay, if we presently account for our present situation as we've been small islands, not doing enough, and with no connection with the fallout from enslavement, the failure to address a lot of the issues coming out of that, our sense of confidence, our sense of which perspectives are valuable within the society, a better understanding of our history and our connection with wider history, then that may create a different impression of how we should be moving forward, who should be leading that, etc.
But why is it so complicated? Why do you think we have a difficulty in understanding our own history? You don't think it's our fault that we have not seen it necessary to educate ourselves on our history? I mean, there are so many other races, they're so committed towards...
I still would not use a broad brush. It gives the way you say it gives the impression that efforts have not been made. But even if we were to take it that way, we have the education system is one area where a lot of work could be done. The way in which particular social issues are being examined and addressed.
But let's look at in particular the education system. And the lion's share of our budget normally would go to health and education, and education in particular. But do you think it's being wasted? Do you think that we are just not doing things in a scientific manner, in a manner that would yield results? Especially, let's look at our curriculum. Let's look at how we teach history. Are we doing enough?
Okay. Currently, we teach what is called Caribbean history. It looks at a number of areas that are important to look at. But there is also an importance in looking at wider world history. I don't think there's necessarily adequate time and effort being put into looking at some of those things. But I'll also go beyond history too. That students learn mathematics, they learn science, and come out of the system with the impression that many of those streams of knowledge stem from Europe, don't have earlier predecessors in other parts of the world, and it leaves the impression that much of what we know about the world and about ourselves comes from that source. Whereas it's well known now that, mathematics, science, even our understanding of time, many of those things, the early development began in parts of Africa. So there's not adequate being done about that in terms of teaching those things in the education system, and it does impact on how persons are able to see the world.
Do you think it's because of a lack of awareness on the part of the powers that be, the authorities, the people who are leading the charge as far as those issues are concerned? So therefore there isn't a deep appreciation.
It may be in part because of that, but it's, I think, also important to note efforts outside of government where those things have been done for a long time, and it may raise the question of to what extent are other views being entertained in terms of how we see education and how we see development.
But if we know so much about our history, whilst we're not applying the effects of what our forefathers would have experienced, why do you think that, for example, Emancipation Day seems to be just another public holiday in St. Lucia? We pay a lot of attention to Christmas, Journée Creole, independence. Why not Emancipation Day as well?
I don't think generally that aspect of our identity has been particularly prominent, and especially in connection with that period. We do have a lot of traditions that have persisted. We had both from the enslavement period, and we also had in St. Lucia an indentureship period when, after the slave trade had ended, you had Africans who were being brought here. And that's how we get our kutumba and these things. But in terms of slavery and actually examining its impact, that is something that, for the most part, I could say has been dealt with by groups like the Rastafari, FRC. So that's where these things have really been dealt with. But on a broad level, even emancipation itself, for a number of years, its commemoration has been something that has been dealt with by Rastas. I think in the late 90s, the government got involved, and since then it has been dealt with by the Focus Center, and I think now by CDF. So in terms of people actually appreciating the importance of emancipation and dealing with such issues, I don't think on a broad level that is something that people have been sensitized to. To see it outside of this group.
It lacks commercial value, you think? That's why?
I don't think that people would simply appreciate something just because of commercial value. But if generally dealing with certain issues are not entertained, people will not necessarily see, okay, why emancipation is important. It doesn't just fall out of nowhere. The Rastas, I guess, they would say they deal with emancipation in a particular context. They also dealt with holidays like African Liberation Day. But if these things are not generally being dealt with, then just saying emancipation, persons may not put it in a particular context.
Do you think it was, and I do not mean to be facetious, but do you think it will resonate with us if the white man decides to lead the charge on this, to attach great importance to it, and to educate us and to say, This is why you have to put so much more emphasis on Emancipation Day, and this is what we did you. And going forward, you definitely have to show greater appreciation for the past.
I don't know, but as I said, I don't think adequate has been done for us to say that persons are not responsive to that.
Because I'm saying we have a University of the West Indies.
Yes.
Okay. Why shouldn't the UE lead the charge on this and really do it in a way that that will appeal to the wider audience? We have had people who are grounded in the Black movement and so on, you know, Black Power movement and things of that nature. We've had leaders who are grounded in this, the likes of George Charles, John Compton, and long before that, Eric Williams of Trinidad and Tobago and so on. But why hasn't it really resonated with the people?
I won't say it hasn't either. I know at particular periods of time, persons did appeal to those things.
It's no longer seen as a project.
And I don't want to assume the role of speaking for everybody either. Again, I would say that if persons are made more aware of those things, then you can see whether persons really respond to them. But in the absence of that, I don't think it's fair to say that persons don't respond or persons respond in a particular way.
But to me, there's insufficient evidence. Or is it the case that we the people who read? We do not invest our time in things that are seemingly important to us in terms of our history and so on. We more look at the mundane and the things there with value can expire at some point in time.
Even in what people call mundane, I think sometimes some very important lessons exist. I mean, for instance, people dismiss things like music and movies and stuff, and people do respond to those things. I think they raise certain issues and raise certain perspectives in ways that are not generally seen as significant. I was watching an interview recently with, I think it was Miss Catherine Seeley's. Right, and the whole issue of pride, and she was making a very good point that there was a lot of opposition to this match. I later saw an interview with Ras Iron, where he raised another very interesting perspective. But she was making the point of the lack of the absence of certain points of view when certain issues are being raised, and then the response in particular instances. Rasayan was being interviewed about the same issue and shared his perspective. I think all of these are perspectives that should be entertained and have a big part to play in how we understand those things.
You are a history teacher.
Yes.
You're being paid a salary. I mean, gainfully employed. How do you feel, I mean, when you are educating our children, and do you feel that you're reaping and you're making any kind of gains? You are succeeding in imparting important knowledge to your students, and they're really appreciating it, and they will practice whatever that they are being taught, and they will give true meaning to it. And therefore, we'll have a people out there who are empowered to, for example, lead the charge on issues relating to emancipation and other things.
Okay. At present, there are a lot of schools where history is actually absent, or students are not introduced to it until they are choosing their subjects. So that itself is a significant issue. In terms of my experience with my students, I mean, it's a very interesting experience, the kinds of perspectives you get from the students, which they get from the elders. I heard a student once said to me, "So all Muslims are not terrorists, but all terrorists are Muslims." He said his pastor told him that. But in teaching my students, despite the limitations of the present curriculum, I think there is room to introduce students to a lot of important information and to engage them in discussion so that they could appreciate the value of history and also to inquire on their own, which they do. But I would also hasten to add that it should not just be the students. I know there are many adults who are informing themselves and many adults do need to because they interact with the students. And right now it's a lot easier now to get certain kinds of information. We have persons like Dr. Ben Yokanan, Dr. John Henry Clark, and a lot of other younger persons who share information, Dr. Walter Rodney, etc., that persons can encounter, whether it be through reading, whether it be through videos, and to help them understand certain things better.
But as it seems right now, as it stands right now, do we appear that we're just scratching the surface as far as history is concerned and its teaching in the schools?
We're scratching the surface in a lot of areas. But I do think that if teachers, I mean, even if we are teachers, there's a lot that we can and should learn. Not just history teachers, but physics, mathematics, etc. About those areas of knowledge that we are teaching, that we can teach it in a better context.
As far as the history that's being taught to our children, do you think that it's coming handy to them? It's something that they can utilize?
They can
How
be
relevant is what is being taught,
okay.
In other words?
I think it is still relevant. Much of the syllabus deals with the period of enslavement and what came after. Now, in some of our history books, it deals with various cultural forms in the Caribbean, some of the various folk religions, etc. I don't think students, although I'm a firm believer that there's a lot of improvements to be made within the curriculum, I think within what exists, students can be given adequate seeds that can stimulate them to seek further.
You're watching Newsmaker Live right here on DBS Television. That's the eve of Emancipation Day, to be observed or celebrated in the Caribbean, including St. Lucia, tomorrow. There's a song by Gypsy, I'm sure that most of you are familiar with that song, 22 years old, called Little Black Boy. How has he fared since that song was released in 1997? We'll discuss that issue among other related developments when we come back. And of course, later, your calls. My guest this evening on a Newsmaker Live, history teacher, Mr. Nkrumah Lucian. Stay with us. Welcome back. Thank you so much for staying with us. We'll be taking your calls at about 9:30, and we continue to focus on the observance of Emancipation Day, which is tomorrow. My guest is Mr. Nkrumah Lucien, history teacher, and we have been discussing emancipation over the past half hour, and we'll continue to do so within the next hour or so. So please stay with us for that. The song by Gypsy, recorded in 1997, Little Black Boy, employing black children to ensure that they improve, that they educate themselves so that going forward they'll be able to make a meaningful contribution to the society. Let's play you a clip of that song, dating back to 1997, Little Black Boy by Gypsy. That's Winston Peters.
We want some more. One more. There was a little black boy, a black boy was he. The boy went to school and he come out on see. Never learn how to read, he never learn about math. Never learn how to write, he never study about that. All he study was his speakers, his sneakers and clothes. He learn how to dress, he learn how to pose. Now he can't get no work, he can't get no job. He decide to steal and he decide to rob. But little black boy couldn't last long at all. The police put a bullet through his dunce head skull. Little black boy, go to school and learn. Little black boy, you have to show some concern. Little black boy, education is the key to get you off the street and all poverty. Little black boy, go to school and learn. Little black boy, you have to show some concern. Little black boy, education is the key to get you off the street and off poverty. A little black boy, a rude boy was he. All the boy ambition was to conduct a maxi. With gold teeth and a gold teeth in his mouth. He feel very proud when they call him a tout. So proud was the boy that the boy never learned. He should have worked hard and buy a maxi of his own. But he hustled for $1, he hustled for a smoke. He hustled so that he could buy a little coke. He hooked on the coke and off the maxi. And one more little black vagrant to the country. Little black boy, go to school and learn. Little black boy, you have to show some concern. Little black boy, education is the key to get you off the street and off poverty. Little black boy, think about your race. Little black boy, when would you find your place? Little black boy, education is the key to get you off the street and all poverty. Oh. Did you hear your mother crying? Can you hear your mother crying? But listen, when you're black, you just black. You can't help but being black. But because you are black, you don't stay in the back. Be black, or let me conscious. I say, be black, but be conscious. Brother, look in the front, see who's the doctor. Look in the back, see who's the lawyer. Look in the bank, see who's the banker. Look at the business, who's the owner. Look at the staff, see who's the worker. Look at the truck, see who's the dan man. Look who eating out of them garbage can. Look in the jail, see who you see to. Little black boy, just like you. Little black boy, go to school and learn.
Little black boy.
You have to show some concern.
Little black boy.
Education is the key
Little black
to
boy.
get you off the street and all poverty. Little black boy, think about your race.
Little black boy.
When would you find your place?
Little black boy.
Don't take no drug.
Little black boy.
Oh no no, a little.
Black boy.
Thank you.
Little black boy. Little black boy.
Quite a powerful performance there by the 1997 Calypso Monarch, that's Gypsy, decrying the situation involving black men, young black men over in Trinidad and Tobago. 22 years later, what has changed? Now, it was recently that the former Calypsonian admitted that one of his sons is in jail because he wanted to be a bandit. And quote, "I'm a victim of that. I have a son who is doing crazy things and in jail right now. I brought him up well, but he chose that way of life. He had the best home, the best school. He had drivers and people to take him wherever he wanted to go, but he grew up to be a bandit. What am I supposed to do?" He added, "I was poor, but I grew up to be educated and someone outstanding in society. I do that for myself. How come the little Indian children are doing well? The Syrian children are doing well, but most black people are into crime and in jail," he lamented. Your thoughts on that song, dating back to 1997?
My thoughts about it. You get, okay, songs like Little Black Boy. And we were speaking a little earlier about these discussions of the condition of blacks, etc. And often it centers around this, around criminality, failing within the system. But I find there tends to be too little discussion of okay, so what is he's speaking about? Going little black boy, go to school and learn. Many people go into the school system and come out. Who helps to shape that system, right? Why do so many go through that system and are unable to come out? The Prime Minister was giving some statistics some time ago of the level of literacy. So it while it is important to point out those statistics and those situations, questions also have to be raised about our policymakers and what they are doing in terms of providing a better situation within that context.
But do you think it's a case where we just do not have the knack, we don't want to make the necessary sacrifices? Because in the Trinidad context, what he's saying there's why the little Indian children are doing better than the blacks? Why do you think the people of the Syrian community, children of the Syrian community, are doing better than the blacks?
There are a lot of issues that are involved in that, dating back to the old foundations of those countries. Often when the discussions are, it does not point out, for instance, some of the inferiority complexes that are internalized and reinforced within the system. The fact that coming out of slavery, the absence of any proper reparations being made. But without having those discussions, it leads to the same prejudice of the same myths that are created about black people, of being lazy, etc. So to have a serious discussion about that, it needs to be a lot wider than that.
But do you think it's a case where we always find excuses and we always hack back to the period of slavery? That is why we're in this particular predicament right now of not doing well economically and so on. But what about black countries where you have black leaders, where they have the natural resources, and yet still those are failed states?
Those are failed states. Okay, I don't want to, before we go over there, it's not a matter of an excuse. But if you are dealing with an issue that has wide roots, you deal with an issue where the persons involved are not the only ones involved, that they exist within a system, then you also need to be discussing those things as well. And leaving that out of the discussion, it leads to the expected conclusion that this is an inferior people, and these are people who are lazy, etc. So to have a serious discussion about that, then we need to go wider than that.
So let's go deeper into the issue. What is at the root of the problem? Is it primarily slavery? Is it our way of being socialized? Do you think the psychological impact of slavery taking its toll on us?
Okay, I do expect
at least some of us.
Yeah, I don't expect to summarize it here, but I'm going to raise some issues. You spoke about the socialization. We know about internalizing poor ideas about beauty. Ideas that...
What about beauty?
Well, the poor standards of beauty which exist within our society, from hair to skin color and these various things. An education system where students come in, many of them are unable to excel within that system. And it cannot be that they lack ability, that they're not intelligent, and not adequate questions are being asked about that. The idea that all knowledge of value, all useful ideas about ourselves and about how we should see the world can only come from particular sources. That creates within people a certain idea as well. Constantly facing information which reinforces certain ideas, not only about ourselves, but even, you mentioned Africa, that people can't look at that part of themselves in a positive manner, or even to look at it critically enough to factor it into how they understand themselves. All of those things impact on how people will interact with the world. Again, this part of the picture, I mean, we can even go further to people's ideas of divinity, goodness, greatness. All of these things would play a part and should be part of the discussion.
Gypsy goes on to say that our African people, we have no shortage of people to emulate. But it is something that started long ago. I can't even put my finger on it. He's saying that people strongly believe that people of African descent are not emulating the right people. Don't you think we have sufficiently successful black people all around the world that our young people, all of us, can emulate, and we choose to emulate other people than ourselves?
I think, yes, there are many people who could be emulated, or should be emulated. Many persons who provide useful influences. I also believe that what is put forward as success may be a bit limited as well. That economic achievement or getting particular awards, people's standards of what is successful. But yeah, there are many people who could be emulated for various reasons. I mean, we know many different names, people like Walter Rodney, Marcus Garvey. But how do they fit into how people see, okay, where we should be going as a people?
But right now, what people who tend to emulate the rap artists, those have the blings and the millions of dollars and so on, mainly sports and the athletes, the likes of Jordan and so on. But do you think that we have a tendency as black people to look at things on the surface as opposed to look at things from a deep perspective as to who is successful, and not focus primarily on the material stuff? Why do you think we have the propensity to do that? It appears.
Yeah. Much of what we see out there in the world, a lot of it comes from the United States, where the blacks, they have their own situation, and the areas where they are projected as being successful is in the areas of music and sport. And of course, many of our young people take admiration of that, which is understandable to some extent. And of course, maybe they may not be critical enough about how they examine some of them. And I still would not take a broad brush even with the hip-hop artists and all of them. Even among the hip-hop artists and even among the sports personalities, there are persons who stand out and take a stand. But generally, the picture that our young people see is generally blacks are not successful, and then the standard for success is economic success, and where blacks in the US are succeeding is in the area of entertainment and sports.
But right now, as black in St. Lucia, we tend to coexist in terms of the population, because the last census did indicate that, for example, black African descent, people of black African descent, 85.3%, makes 10.9%, East Indian 2.2%, other races 1.6%, unspecified 0.1 of a percent in terms of the ethnic groups. Why do you think that we have been able to largely coexist peacefully in St. Lucia compared to the other countries, like say the likes of Trinidad and Guyana? Because of black being the dominant race?
Okay, Trinidad, Guyana have a much larger percentage of
people of Indian descent.
And we know that these differences have also been manipulated by politicians. The fact that in St. Lucia you have a large African population, and there seems not to have been major issues of division, I don't think that necessarily gives the impression, gives an accurate impression of the relations. Even despite that, it may also have to do with the fact that even in this wide African population, we do internalize a lot of the broad prejudices dominate our society. Even if people coexist, these people still have those ideas about each other, and it may the tolerance of those points of view might be the reason why you may not have these open issues. But you hear people speak of those various things.
Okay, for example, and let's be blunt about it. Hosting my program, New Spain Youth, from time to time, especially today on the eve of Emancipation Day, people are still making reference to the fact that you still have those people in power. And of course, is a direct reference to the fact that we have a prime minister who is not black. I'm sure he's been saying that in the United States he will not be considered to be white. But in the case of St. Lucia, as far as his ethnicity is concerned, he would be considered white. Why do you think that there is still this deep suspicion among us when it comes to the relations between blacks and white? Yes, we coexist, but there is the lingering suspicion.
I mean, even with the absence of the outside of the prime minister, and of course he's a St. Lucian, so he's quite entitled to holding the position.
Even if he was not a St. Lucian, because as far as the Constitution is concerned, you need not born in St. Lucia to be prime minister.
Well, our first prime minister was not born in St. Lucia. So it's quite in order for him to hold the position. We know people have the general idea that economically, among the various groups, there's a asymmetry there that there's in terms of person's possession of wealth, that certain groups do own a lot more, and of course these attitudes seep in to discussions of other things,
But you're saying that we did not hold it against people, for example, of that particular race, that kind of background. Don't you think that is a form of racism that we're exhibiting on our part as well as black people?
I wouldn't say it's racism. It may not always be fair judgment, even if it may be based on something factual, that you do have that inequality, so the inequality does exist in terms of wealth, etc. It may be inputted in cases, discussions, and situations where it may not necessarily apply. But
in a general sense, do you think that psychologically, what kind of psychological toll do you think that this is taking on us?
What exactly?
In terms of the vestiges of slavery, the fact that you still have to work in certain environments where you have people who have a particular race who are still serving as your superiors, your managers, and even at the national level as your prime
Yeah,
minister?
to a large extent, our leaders have not seem to be able to think of development outside of a large dependency on outside, especially countries like Europe, the United States. Presently, tourism is our major industry.
And our dominant visitors are white.
Are white. It does reinforce. It does reinforce that dominance, the general dominance, and in a sense, I could say rightly so, because again, the model of development is that these countries are wealthy without an examination of why they are wealthy, and therefore, our only way to develop is to provide them with this particular service.
Which most people consider to be subservient. I mean, especially in the hotel sector.
Yeah, you will have tourism in many countries. You do have tourism, but it should raise questions about our possibilities for development. What is the potential of our people?
Live is the eve of Emancipation Day, and my guest this evening is history teacher, Mr. Nkrumah Lustian. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll be taking your calls. I was hoping that you have some questions. I was hoping that you have some comments to share with us on the broadcast this evening. Welcome back. Thank you so much for staying with us. We'll put a telephone number on screen so that you can call right now with your questions and comments for my guest to be part of the discussion. He is Mr. Nkrumah Lucien, and he is a history teacher. This discussion is on the heels of the observance of Emancipation Day, which is tomorrow. And I'm sure that most of you are looking forward to that holiday tomorrow. But with regard to its significance, I'm sure that many of you are not looking forward to spend some time to reflect on the fact that we have gained a whole lot, and it is at the behest of our forefathers. We have our first caller line. Good evening to you. This is Newsmaker Live. You're on the air.
Good evening, Timothy.
Good evening to you, ma'am.
I have been listening throughout the show, but something is running through my mind. I listened to all the different comments and comparisons of races and whatnot. But I just thought what I was trying to listen to is the reasons for the non-celebration of Emancipation Day or interest in Emancipation Day. I am of the opinion that this business of reparation, is it reparation?
Yeah.
Yeah, reparation, if it would come true, would help to boost the image of the black man. At least it would be like an acknowledgement of what happened during slavery time. Because my grandmother always told me she was born on the slave plantation, and she always told me what her mother went through and whatnot. So I believe the only way, until we have been successful with the business of reparation, at least we can say okay, the slaves are being honored, something like this. What do you think?
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Your point? Your reaction?
Yeah, I think there's value in recognizing Emancipation Day, even while we wait for developments to do with reparations. The point is often made. I remember Bongo wisely often makes the point that reparations is also an internal matter. Again, it's a good reference point to recognize certain things about ourselves and our society. Persons often speak about emancipation in terms of 1838 and the enslaved Africans then, but we shouldn't have any illusion that our society sometimes is beyond many of those issues to do with that period.
In terms of the reparation, how do you share that money? If the countries do commit to, let's say, several $1 billion, how do you divvy up that money?
Right. Well, I don't think it's a matter of just dividing up money. It's a matter of addressing particular issues. So reparations is not just about individuals collecting money, but about money being put towards addressing certain things, right? So it would also involve that that things that are currently not being properly dealt with, persons may access it in different ways, and persons may also benefit from it through its wider applications.
But do you think, for example, normally those things would call for the battered word consultation. Who is to determine how that money should be utilized? Don't you think that one set of people would want the direct compensation, while others would want the resources to be utilized in a way that would certainly have a positive impact on the black population
Yeah.
to a large extent?
Yeah, reparations at this point is being dealt with on the CARICOM level through the government. I think it's very important for persons at all levels to be aware of the developments, to assess how reparations been handled, and to share their views about it as well. You know, I don't think it should just be left, you know, for the governments to decide.
But something tells me that certainly it will take a very long time. It will take strong representation on the part of our governments. Professor Hilary Beckles, I think, is part of this. He has been doing its utmost, but don't you think it would certainly take a whole lot more representation to really convince the likes of Europe that they need to pay up?
Our governments continue to interact with the governments of those countries that were involved. We should ask ourselves on what terms are we interacting with them? What kind of strong statements or strong stances do our governments take where those things are concerned?
What kind of strong stance can they take? Is it up to them? Do they have a choice in the matter? Because we all know our leaders and our countries like to cower.
Yeah, maybe they like to cower. Does that mean that they have to cower? How we deal with particular issues, I think, can affect how the issue of reparations is dealt with. Even on the continent, you have had...
On that point, we have a call. Good evening, Newsmaker Live, you're on the air.
Can I ask you a question?
Good evening to you, sir. Yeah, go ahead.
Let me tell you, this reparation and everything, did the white man go into South Africa and take the slaves and bring them to the coast? Or did our own black people did it? So who is going to pay my relatives, okay, compensation for those black Africans who went in there, captured them and brought them to the coast to be sold to the white man? Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Well, I mean, this happening, and that's an issue I brought to you earlier on, that our black brothers were complicit in this whole thing, I mean, in West Africa and so on. So how do you put that case to the persons who participated in the slave trade and benefited, that definitely they need to pay up? Those in West Africa, they participate as well. Those people.
I think it's a fair question.
We have a call. Good evening, Newsmaker Live, you're on the air. Hello.
Let me tell you something.
Listening to you, caller. Turn down the volume of your television set, caller. There's a terrible feedback.
All right, okay, hold on.
So address that quickly and then go ahead with your
Okay, you
contribution.
hear me now?
Yes, go ahead, please.
You okay now?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Let me tell you something. You see right now what is happening here in St. Lucia? I cannot understand that. At my age, all them kind of day, carnival day in every area in the island, this kind of day, and we complain in the country have no money. It is time that nonsense. When I grew up, I did not know all them kind of day.
But this day,
have to stop.
this day tomorrow, caller, Emancipation Day is very
Let me hear your
important.
comments now.
I'm just saying to you, can you hold on? Emancipation Day is okay. All right.
Yeah. I just want to quickly address, the case being brought up for reparations is to deal with that particular aspect of it. That not only the participation, but being the main beneficiaries of it. Of course, there is, if you deal with the entire situation of slavery, we'd have to deal with that aspect as well. But the chief beneficiaries of the slave trade were these various European countries, and this is the case that's been brought in. It does not preclude discussion, the very important discussion as well, of circumstances on the continent that may have contributed to it as well.
All right. To address the last caller, don't you think that the fact that we have so many days, and it's correct to a certain extent, I mean, nearly every month, every other month or every month, you have an observance of something, some bloco, we have Carnival, we have Independence, and so on. So those important observances like Emancipation Day, a way for people of African descent in the Caribbean to remind themselves of the struggle for freedom, that important observance is getting lost.
If we say it's getting lost, again, I mean, earlier we had this discussion of what is being done to get people to appreciate it. Where it came from, I mean, those who initially commemorated it had a good understanding of what they were dealing with. But that has to be done too. And people have to be informed to get a good sense of it. And I know that in communities like Labrie, in Dennery, they have been holding lectures. CDF has been having their lectures as well. But generally, people have to get access to better information as well. Not to just appreciate emancipation, but the issue that it involves. It need not necessarily be dealt with only during that time.
But something tells me that on that basis, then, we have been failing our people in terms of educating them about the importance of such an observance. Because if it has been observed since 1833, Emancipation Day, I mean, and we're 2019, it should be a continuation. Good evening to you. This is Newsmaker Live on the air.
Let me tell you, hold on there. Let me tell you.
Yes, go on.
That young guy that's talking there, he knows nothing. He's a young man.
Okay.
80 years. He knows nothing.
How old are you?
There are too many days in St. Lucia now.
How old are you, caller?
80 years.
Okay, so tell me something.
Nothing.
What do you know?
Many days. When I grew up a young man, there was all these kind of days. We didn't know that. And right now we complain in the country have no money. Too many days, too many carnival days, too many bloco, too many that, too many this, too many. That is nonsense.
Okay.
That young man that's talking to.
Okay.
He knows nothing. He's a young boy.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if we have too many days, then we should look at all of the days and see which ones that are in excess of what we should have. But yeah.
But again, the point is, and I'm going back to the earlier reaction that you made, that is basically it's need for the re-education of our people and so on, and maybe it's because of the lack of awareness. But why should there be the lack of awareness on such an important issue like Emancipation Day? Jews take the Holocaust very seriously. Mm-hmm. Again, does it have to do something with the black race?
In terms of us understanding...
And setting our priorities.
In terms of us understanding our situation, understanding our social issues, understanding our course of development, to what extent do we look at this period? Do we look at the impact it has had? And then what needs to be addressed? If that is not generally part of the discussion, then a day like Emancipation Day would not have much significance, because generally in the course of how we deal with things, that is not part of the discussion.
Is that reflective of the society, how we treat important things?
I'm not going to put a broad brush on it, but
Okay.
but in terms of leadership,
I'm sure you have organized various public events. I mean, you have the Writers' Forum taking place at the Central Library and so on. You have those public discussions on Emancipation Day and so on, and the turnout will be very, very, very poor compared to, as the caller is suggesting, too many days, carnival, and other activities of a social nature. And I'm looking at it only purely from the St. Lucia perspective, St. Lucia angle. What does that say about our people?
It may say that persons at present have not gotten a very good appreciation of those things. And that would have to happen in time.
But it does not say that we are just too simplistic, we are simpletons.
No, I don't think so. I think, again, if for a very long time, this has not been seen as important, or this has been seen as a troublesome issue.
My apologies to you. Hold on. Good evening, Newsmaker Live, you on the air? Hello?
Hi, Timothy. How are you doing?
I am okay, sir. Good evening to you.
Good evening to your guests.
Good evening.
I think this emancipation thing is not being taken serious in this country as a nation. I think individuals take it serious, and maybe certain groups, for example, the Rastafarian group, ICA. But as a nation, we have not taken this serious. When we compare how Barbados and Jamaica, and even Trinidad to some extent, celebrate Emancipation Day, we just see it as a normal holiday where we have fun. We don't reflect on what emancipation really means.
But does that say something about us, caller?
Well,
what does it say about us?
It says that as a people, we still think, who we are and where we're going. We have not re-engineered our thinking and our mind to accept ourselves as descendants of Africans. Because in the communities where people say not Africans. So in other words, some of us don't understand our roots. We don't accept our roots. Now, all of these things have a portion of the population confused. Now, once there is confusion within a population, you can understand the level of division, the level of sarcasm that exists amongst us. So until we as a people understand and want to re-engineer our thinking, our mind, we will always celebrate emancipation the way we do it now and 10 years down the line. So the problem is us as a people.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Good.
And again, it boils back, don't you think, to the education system? Because, you have Journée Creole, you have the various activities, you have La Marguerite, and so on, La Rose, and those are introduced to our students at the school level. And you see it in how the children are dressed, you see it in the various plays and the performances and so on. But you do not see that being manifested in how we observe Emancipation Day. And again, it boils down to, I think, Ellen, you're talking about our leaders with regard to this whole thing.
Well, I lost that train of thought, but I do like the contribution of the last caller. But what I would say though, it's clear, from a leadership standpoint, this has not been the priority. But there are elements of our society which are highlighting it, and persons can also look to them in terms of how you should deal with emancipation and such issues.
And I think the big question is, how do we move forward come next year? Preaching to the entire St. Lucian society and how we should move forward on this particular matter. And maybe somebody should lead the charge as far as this issue is concerned, giving greater prominence to Emancipation Day and not just see it as just another holiday. Do we have another call line? Okay, we have lost that call. Yeah. But continue to call us once again. The number is on the screen, 451-9788, 451-9788. You are watching Newsmaker Live right here on DBS Television with my guest, Mr. Nkrumah Lucian. The name Nkrumah, a former African leader, was it a deliberate effort on the part of your parents to call you this name because of the meaning behind it?
Yeah, I think they place some significance on that.
Okay. We have a call. Good evening, Newsmaker Live, you're on the air.
Hello, good evening.
Hi, good evening to you, ma'am. Your television set is on. Turn down the volume, please. And then you can continue with your contribution. Yes, can you go ahead, please?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
I'm saying, in the Emancipation Day is a respectful day. We should celebrate Emancipation Day as Emancipation Day. But Carnival is not a respectful day in this day and age. Carnival is just a bacchanal. Carnival was not that Carnival that is there now. Carnival, they're making Carnival just, the people that organizing Carnival, they make Carnival just for them to make money. They don't make Carnival as Carnival. Carnival was the day they're supposed to keep it on the date it was supposed to be, and make Carnival as Carnival was before. Carnival is a day where people have to respect and have honor with the Lord Jesus Christ. God do not like the Carnival that is happening now. The Carnival that is happening now is a money-making thing. No one that have respect for themselves and respect for their wife and children and respect for their homes and anything will not keep that kind of Carnival.
Okay, but let me ask you a question. What kind of prominence, therefore, let's forget Carnival for a moment, should be given to Emancipation Day? What can we do to give greater prominence to Emancipation Day?
What can we do to give something for Emancipation Day? Emancipation Day is Emancipation Day, which we have respect for. We can go to church, we can keep a party, we can go to a hotel and keep and have some friends with fun and stuff like that. Even a dance, we can keep a dance because it's a holiday. It's Emancipation Day. we having a barbecue, we having a little fete, something, a party. Friends meet with one another, and we're enjoying this time for Emancipation Day. But there is too many days like the month. It's too many days, and the days that they're not having the days for respect. They're having the days to make money. It's a money making thing, days and days and days. I don't understand, and I don't like it.
Okay, thank you so much. So therefore, based on what the caller just said there, if we commercialize Emancipation Day, then people who come in, they might not know what they're celebrating, but they'll have a good time, don't you think? Hold that point. Good evening, Newsmaker Live, you on the air?
Yes, Tim. Good night. Good night, Tim.
Good night to you, sir.
Good night.
I've been hearing about emancipation all the time, but nobody mentioned people like William Wilberforce and Granville Sharp, a son of 12 from a family of 12 that fought for the freedom of slavery. I'm not hearing much about those people, as though they're not around, nobody speak about them. So why are we not saying nothing about those people who fought for the freedom of slavery to have us like that?
All right, thank you so much. Your reaction?
Okay. Yeah, if persons are looking at the history of emancipation, they look at that and they may get some interesting facts as well. But I don't know that we mentioned anybody here in terms of emancipation, and there are many nameless people, black people, who fought throughout that period, long before there was a William Wilberforce, and after, to bring about the end of slavery. But I do think it's important that all of it be discussed.
But you make it a point earlier. Do you think we need to commercialize, go the route of commercializing Emancipation Day? Make it more appealing? Because it appears, in its raw state, that people are just not gravitating towards it. Nobody is taking it and causing it to be something that is marketable, something that will be not marketable, but appreciated by the wider St. Lucian population. We have a call. Good evening, Newsmaker Live, you're on the air.
Yeah, Tim, it's me again. A while ago, you sort of cut me off. I wasn't ready.
My apologies, sir.
No problem.
On this occasion, I apologize.
That's all right. The point I wanted to make, Tim, is that there's a direct link between emancipation and racism, You see, the thing is that a lot of us nowadays, because of the freedom that we have, freedom of how we dress, freedom of what we see, we tend to forget the past, what has happened to where we are right now. And that is why the issue of racism is resurfacing globally. And even in St. Lucia, you have racism because fair-skinned and light-skinned people are treated better than people that are darker in color. It may not be too visible, but it's actually happening. So I think the emancipation thing is something that is so serious. It's a legacy. And the person mentioned Granville Sharp and all that, but we have to look at, from Marcus Garvey time coming down, Martin Luther King, all of these people were fighting for the rights for black people. And not because we have achieved some rights that we should stop it there, because we have nations and nations to come, and none of us here are keeping the fight and the battle for that. Now, in terms of what we should do, I think the same way we set up a national committee for Carnival, we should set up a national committee for emancipation. And we develop a strategic plan, and from there, we know where we're going in the next 10 years. And the government should support that by giving funding, and the private sector, everybody should support it. All right? And then the whole thing about school programs and community programs to create an awareness, because there's not a thorough awareness within the communities. Okay?
All right.
And the advocacy that's needed. Just a few hints. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. I think it made some sense. I think it's a very serious point that he just made a contribution in terms of the suggestion that is made and the way forward. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it has to be seen in context, I think.
My apologies again. We have a call. Newsmaker Live, you're on the air? Okay, we lost the caller. You're saying?
Yeah, that if we're talking about the appreciation of emancipation, I do agree the contribution where you give funding to persons who are actually doing work on the ground where those things are concerned.
Good evening. Newsmaker Live, you're on the air.
Good evening, Mr. Polio, and good evening to your guests.
Good evening to you, caller.
I could not hold back. I had to attempt to make a contribution. Tim, you have the ears of a lot of people, perhaps yourself and Mr. Lucian and other like-minded St. Lucians can start a television series, a continuous bombardment of the psyche of St. Lucians on the whole subject of emancipation and the attendant topics that we've been hearing, reparation and all of that. Because it certainly will require more than just the awareness and, of course, more than the observation of that one day on August 1st. I am very passionate about emancipation, but how much do I know? And where do I go? Or what processes, what educational programs are there in existence around me, from grassroots to formal education to tertiary education to national events that constantly, formally and informally, enshrine in my psyche as it relates to the importance and the various ins and outs about emancipation, how I should value it and whatnot. There is nothing happening. Making it commercial will simply not have the desired effect. It will just become another activity of merriment, and the meaning will not be found when it is converted into a commercial event. So emancipation, not just emancipation, but many other things that should be taught and rehashed and we should become disciples and pupils of, need to have a more constant or prominent presence throughout the months, years, and in everything we do nationally. I would like to wish everyone a proper celebration of that day, and perhaps the discussion that has started today, well, it didn't start today, but today's program can spur some of us on to find those creative ways to keep it constant. It has to be a constant ring. The bell has to toll all the time. Mr. Lucian is doing a wonderful job, but you could see that he's very diplomatic with what he says, and he's also very measured with what he says. But I think there needs to come a time where you just need to let the information out in its raw state and let people formulate their own opinions. Black people, myself being very black, very close to my African heritage, have a lot of bad things have happened to black people, and they don't even know. They are in a state, we are in a state, we don't even know how we got there. And we're looking for the next booze fete, the next excitement of the flesh. Because, you know, you've been in the bad thing for such a long time that you're looking for tomorrow to feel good like everybody else, like the white people you see on television in their coats and ties. So this is the kind of indoctrination that you get as a child and growing up into your adulthood. Try to aspire to the dream or what you see out there. So we need a program that will hug the airways, or programs that will hug the airwaves, that will bring formally and informally the kind of thinking, because it is going to take a lot more work than what we're having here tonight. I thank you very much for entertaining me, sir, and you have a wonderful program as usual.
You too, sir. Thank you so much for your contribution. I think well-meaning, and also you touch a very point that is in a very sustained effort and in a measured effort. You need to ensure that you get the message out there so that people can gravitate towards it and attach greater importance to it. Initially, a lot of those programs will get lots of likes, you know, and a lot of people do not view it and so on. But if you do it on a continuous basis, I'm sure that people will be exposed to it to the point that they will at some point say to themselves that there's need to give it a closer listing. Good evening, this is Newsmaker Live. I will call you on the air.
Bonsoir.
Oui, bonsoir, ça va fait? Moi bien.
Ok. Moi, on y a pas disturb programme là, on y a qui calendrier, moi a batwa nan.
Ça pas problème, nous bon.
Merci chef. Ouais, nous pas parler à bon appel d'animation. C'est rata nous tan qui mène ba ça vinn pour premier. Bon nous même pas ni tellement non déjà ba ça. C'est pas moi nous ça dire ça.
Mais moi, attends, Mundi, moi, attends, on dit, bah, ça pas tellement fort. Quand on dit, on va répéter ça pour ça dire avant, ça fait ça, mais ça te dit à des beaux. Black man, même qu'on nous-mêmes. Nous, pareil, nous, nous division between nous-mêmes. Nous, nous, avons quoi, journal, la parole locale, mais à starting, à dans la prochaine time, là. Mais c'est nous-mêmes, capture, nous, pas blanc. Yo non m'a pas la voix, on n'a pas la voix, ça va mieux répéter, mais ben ça vrai. Pour tout le temps qu'on va bien division between nous encore, up to right now, nous n'ayons pas unite avec l'autre. Et c'est pas tellement non, les gens ne pas ça, c'est recent, c'est nous, c'est tellement dit, bah, about, programme qu'on parle about là. Quand c'est pas, moi, bagaille, ou nous ça, ready, share, tout ça, on va dire là. Quand si on ready, ça débat, pour me lever, ça vient d'ouvrir, il faut nous, en cahier, entraîner en bas ça. Nous-mêmes en chèque, nous pas de knowledge en bas ça. Moi, nous, si pas de rasta qui commence à ça, nous voyons même ça en bas ça. Mais moi, je me dis, encore répéter comment dire encore. Nous-mêmes, nous-mêmes, capture nous-mêmes, par exemple, donc, qui m'a fait rally, ou qu'a fait, Jean Blanc rêve payer nous, en l'argent manuel, nous-mêmes, nous, capture nous-mêmes, nous, à bas blanc. Oui, up to now, nous avons pas d'accord, nous avons coupé avec tout. Bye bye, thank you.
Merci. And Nkrumah, you care to respond in Creole? Can you?
I can attempt. I'm not a master of it, but I think it's also important to address those issues in both languages, because that is actually very much connected with it. Now, what precisely did you do?
Well, the contribution made by the last caller.
Ali de moi c'est ça nom là dit Ivwe puis ça chay moun pas connaître en chay information les nous ka parler by esclavage et émancipation et c'est ça bon c'est moun qui parler anglais yo ka ni more plus information so ça va montrer nous
c'est nous qui éduquer nous pour faire
oui en grand effort
oui
ni en anglais ni en créole pour mon comprendre c'est ba ça primaire esclavage manière affecter nous et ça nous pour faire about it.
Final comments in English.
In English. Yeah, I think while we focus on emancipation, it's important to understand that, as I've been trying to emphasize, that for people to appreciate emancipation and other things related to that, we need to have those discussions. And as the gentleman said, people need to get more information. We have a national television station. There's a lot of information around. There are very good documentaries that persons can get access to. We have our libraries. Persons can be given information, and there are groups on the ground who are making certain efforts, and resources can be made available to them. I don't know whether the point should simply be to get persons to celebrate something which they may not attach much significance to. But if persons can be engaged, if persons get the opportunity to develop an appreciation, then that would be a lot more substantial.
And Nkrumah Lucien, thank you so much for being my guest on this evening's Newsmaker Live. And to you as always, thank you so much for watching and thank you so much for contributing via your calls. If it's Wednesday, it's Newsmaker Live. Time now for the clip that peaked. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Timothy Paulian saying good night and see you next time.
That was so cool, call it there.